Before the episode begins, I just want to acknowledge that May 21st, 2020 marked the passing of Zach Berkshire, the executive editor of Anime News Network and creator of their podcast, Ancast. I didn't know Zach personally. He actually has never been on this podcast, and to be perfectly honest, I don't think he even knew it existed, but I still feel that I should acknowledge this, as Ancast was probably a bigger influence on the style and approach that I use in Zonan Canada than any other podcast or any other publication, frankly. That said, I'm a little disappointed that I have to attach this to an episode that I feel is a little subpar, which is entirely my fault and not my guests'. It was a little thrown together. That said, I am definitely going to continue to struggle to bring the type of insight and humor that Zach seemed to pull off effortlessly in everything he did. Donations in Zach's memory can be made to the Glendale Humane Society and the Trevor Project. Thank you. Hey everyone, welcome to Zonan Canada. I'm your host, Jesse Betteridge. This, of course, is a podcast exploring the connections between anime and Canadian media. This episode, I'm doing another retrospective on a anime series that has had a unique cultural impact in Canada. And I'm actually going to be continuing from a previous episode where we talked about early late-night anime on Teletoon. And joining me to continue this discussion is Ashley Hacker.
My name is Ashley Hacker. I'm a visual effects artist working out of Toronto, Ontario. And I'm going to be completely honest, I really miss anime conventions this year because we're not going to any of them.
They're all canceled except Anime Matsuri, which we're certainly not going to. I'm keeping my fingers crossed that we might have anime conventions again early next year, because I think there's a good chance that they might be canceled for the first half of next year as well, depending on how things go.
I was going to say, you guys are doing quite well in BC.
Yeah, the Western Canada is doing okay, BC and Alberta, and they seem to be getting things under control a little more in Washington, too, but yeah, we'll see what happens.
But Anime North is supposed to be next week, and that's not happening.
Not happening, not even virtually, but at least Dave Merrill's doing a virtual Anime Hell, though, so...
No, they are doing a virtual thing. I forget the date. They announced it on Friday.
Oh, they did? Okay.
It's like Momiji's online experience, Moe.
Is it actually being run by Anime North? Or...
Yeah, because Momiji is their mascot. It's the girl on... I know, like, nobody knows the name of the mascot. I think they just should have called it Anime North Online, because that's easy, but they have their own branding schemes.
Yep. Well, that's nothing unusual for an anime convention.
But
yeah, we're doing a retrospective on an anime series that is important in Canada, and Ashley, I hope you appreciate those 13 lunches I bought for you back in high school, because we're talking about Macross Plus, which of course was I think actually the first anime that aired on Teletoon, because Teletoon, if you weren't aware, did used to run anime targeted at adults, which is of course something that didn't really happen again. Okay, it happened a couple times, but it definitely not something that they embraced very much over the years. Ashley, how would you describe Macross Plus in a nutshell?
The easy answer to that is definitely going to be it's anime Top Gun.
Yeah.
And that's a very good way to get your friends to want to watch it. I do anime screenings, or at least I did until a few months ago, with friends. And it was easy to get a bunch of more casual anime friends in to see Macross Plus. It is a little long to do it in one night for 4 45-minute OVA parts. But at the same time, like, people who are not big anime fans had no problem getting into the show as we watched it.
Yeah, it is considered to be the first real sequel to the original Super Dimension Fortress Macross from 1982. There's Macross 2, but it doesn't count because Kawamori and Studio Nue weren't involved, and Shoji Kawamori, who was not really the creator of Macross, but like the main creative mind behind it, he was actively involved in the production of Macross Plus. Top Gun is something that happened after the original Macross, and it was imperative to make the sequel as much like Top Gun as possible. So he did a lot of research into fighter jets. It resulted in some very impressive work that was supposedly co-directed by Kawamori, but it really seems like Kenichiro Watanabe, who is the creator of Cowboy Bebop, or the director of Cowboy Bebop, probably did more of the creative lifting. But we'll get into that. But Macross Plus despite being a sequel, is very much something that anyone can jump into, which I think is a big part of why it was an important title to run on Teletoon, especially when the station first launched in the early days of extended cable in Canada. There's also a movie version of Macross Plus, which has the 4 OVA episodes edited down into one movie. Everyone I have spoken to says that they like that version a little better and even has some extra footage. It has an extended sequence with Gold fighting the AI fighter jet, which is apparently really impressive. I still haven't seen the movie version. I don't know about you.
I actually haven't, because generally movie versions of animes are not very good, or they're a little too abridged, so I've generally skipped them. I mean, maybe the glaring exception to that is the original Gundam trilogy movies.
Yeah, but the thing is, the Macross Plus was originally meant to be a movie, and the OVA I find is really structured like a movie. The first 3 episodes are basically building up to the 4th episode, which is where all the plot elements kind of culminate together. And I can see why it would be a little better if you maybe trimmed some of the fat and made it a movie and extended some of the action sequences a bit, which is apparently what it does. It does make it especially unfortunate with the way that Teletoon originally presented Macross Plus, though, because when they first started running it in October of 1997, in fact, I think Teletoon launched October 17th, 1997, and they ran late-night anime on Friday and Saturday nights. I couldn't find actual documentation of this, but I believe Macross Plus actually, the first episode aired the first night that Teletoon was on the air. So they had anime day one, and it unfortunately just was something that did not stick. But they would run anime every weekend throughout 1997 and 1998. But they would only run the first 3 episodes of Macross Plus, which would be really frustrating, because you're not getting that payoff from the 4th episode. If you go back you can go on Usenet and look at some discussions that were happening back in 1997 and 1998, and people are just infuriated by the fact that they keep running these episodes over and over again without the resolution in the 4th episode. And I don't think there was ever really an explanation of why that happened. I know there was production problems with the dub of Part 4, but it had already been released by the time.
Yeah, because Episode 4 also has an alternate dub, and technically that's the only dub that's available now for that episode.
It's weird. We'll get into that in a little bit. It's a little frustrating, but basically they had to produce the dub of that 4th episode because there was no separated voice and sound effect tracks that they could work with, so they had to recreate.
There was a song license issue too, I think.
Possibly. I know that all of the background music in the original dub version of Episode 4 is substituted except for the Sharon Apple songs. Everything else they had to recreate, and that may have created some technical issues that made it difficult to broadcast. I don't know. The point is they kept running those 3 episodes over and over again. But after a year, about in the spring of 1999, they did finally get the 4th episode, and they brought this late-night anime back, both to showcase the 4th episode and finally let people watch it, and I think also because their license for the manga entertainment titles was about to run out. I think it was definitely a 2-year license that they had for those things, so they decided to give it one last go with no intention of getting any more, unfortunately. In the last episode where we talk about late-night anime, we focused on the movies that they licensed from manga entertainment. The 2 Patlabor movies, Ninja Scroll.
Yeah, this is the only OVA.
This was the only OVA, the only series, and Royal Space Force as well. I encourage you to go back to that episode because we paint a little bit of a picture of what extended cable looked like in Canada at this time. It was a real frontier, you could say, where broadcasters were just kind of throwing out anything they could get their hands on and seeing what would stick. Which, in the case of Teletoon, that resulted in a very inconsistent lineup, but also one that was wildly experimental. And this was actually the first time that Macross Plus showed up anywhere in English outside of the home video release. Those were the only kind of circumstances where you could, see something like Macross Plus on TV, and I think, to me, that's why this particular broadcast is important. Years later, Teletoon would run like Akira and Armitage and a few other, the Appleseed movies as well. I'm sure more people watched those than saw Macross Plus or any of the other manga movies, but just this particular era of the early days of extended cable, I think, makes the broadcast of this manga entertainment stuff a little more notable.
just the range, depending what time of day you're watching Teletoon, that doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, and especially today when Teletoon is strictly a children's channel. We've seen a complete change in their approach to that. But they were one of the first stations anywhere in the world to have to be a children's station during the day and an adult station at night. Even though
they were an animation station, is probably the better word.
Oh yeah, exactly. Well, on paper they were. Functionally, they were a children's broadcaster during the day and focused on adult audiences at night. But they had that phased approach with young children, families, and then adults. What made it possible for them to do that is the fact that they could be recognized in their license as being not a children's broadcaster, but an animation broadcaster, and that the fact that they could run things based on that distinction. And that's a big reason why they picked up anime, because in their original pitch, in the original regulatory pitch for the station, they said that they would, showcase animation for different audiences from around the world, and anime fit that bill for getting the station off the ground. But unfortunately, it's something they just didn't decide to stick with. If you look on YouTube, you can see some promos floating around for Macross Plus, and there's one early promo, I think, for episode 3. And it feels like they're accurately describing the series, but they have a really difficult time trying to pinpoint what the appeal was.
A conspiracy and a conflict between lovers.
You little punk, I warned you, I won't let you get. How could anyone possibly cancel this project?
In a swirl of malice, the fallen angel awakens.
Madness. I'm canceling this concert and getting that damn tip pulled out.
Protecting what they cherish most, young spirits fly into the sky.
The show is about to begin.
Macross Plus, Volume 3.
And I know that how we both first discovered Macross Plus was in that second airing, when they had earlier time slots in the spring of 1999, and that year when the license was running out, and they just wanted to get that 4th episode out and try exposing it to a bit of a wider audience. The way they promoted it was significantly better. Even though Teletoon didn't seem to have any intention of keeping anime going on the station, at least they kind of figured out what the appeal of something like Macross Plus was with the promotion that they cut for it.
Yeah, and that's when I got into it, because I seriously got into anime in about 2000. It was unavoidable on television beforehand, and you'd be channel surfing, looking at the preview channel, seeing what's up, and bumping into stuff at Teletoon. It wasn't until 2000 looking seriously at anime and stuff and getting into it with other classmates at school. And so, yeah, we were able to see the 4th episode, plus people started, trading DVD rips and stuff.
Yeah, because I think the DVDs would have been out at this point, too. Or
they were definitely out.
They were out around the same time. But yeah, the second run promo they made really creates a strong impression. They didn't have any narration. They focused with Yoko Kanno music, because of course Yoko Kanno did the soundtrack for this series, and it took 2 tracks. Set them against well-chosen clips, and it just does a really good job of selling what made this series special and what set it apart from other things you may have seen on TV at that time. I think for a lot of people it was probably the first time they had heard any music by Yoko Kanno as well.
And music was not usually a selling point for anime until then. Like, usually it's about the show's gimmick, whether it was Monster Rancher or Pokemon or Sailor Moon or stuff. But this is like, no, it's cool music and airplanes. It's a whole soundtrack of amazing songs.
Yeah. And I think this was a few months before Escaflowne hit the airwaves, and that probably would have been a lot of people's first exposure to Yoko Kanno tracks. And the Escaflowne soundtrack was mangled, but most of the important tracks were left in, even though they were rearranged.
I liked that dance intro that Fox Kids did.
It's not bad for what it is. It's just disappointing compared to to the original. So 1999, I think, was a year that a lot of people got exposed to Yoko Kanno's music as a result of that. But yeah, Yoko Kanno was doing the music, and as I mentioned, Shinichiro Watanabe, who's the director of Cowboy Bebop, he pretty much did the legwork in terms of the direction for the OVA, which is kind of funny because he's kind of become notorious for being very hands-off in his directional style since then. But when you look at the staff that worked on Macross Plus, it's almost 1-to-1 for Cowboy Bebop a couple of years later. The biggest difference was the character designer. Cowboy Bebop's character designer was Toshihiro Kawamoto. It was Masayuki for Macross Plus, and Masayuki, of course, is
one of Hideaki Anno's right-hand men. He did a lot of work on Evangelion, and basically anything that Hideaki Anno works on, Masayuki is there replicating a lot of his style a lot of the time. But yeah, this is a rare instance where he did the character designs for something. This is the first anime writing credit for Keiko Nobumoto. She was the screenwriter of Cowboy Bebop and Tokyo Godfathers, more or less the creator of Wolf's Rain. She hasn't done anything else for anime since then, apart from writing the occasional script for Shinichiro Watanabe's series, which is too bad because I think she's really the heart of what made Cowboy Bebop and Wolf's Rain great. But yeah, you see in Macross Plus, you see a lot of early elements that would evolve into Cowboy Bebop later. And we were talking about Yoko Kanno. This was her second anime soundtrack that she contributed titles to. The first was Please Save My Earth, OVA, a few years earlier. This is the first time that she's actually done the full soundtrack for something. Definitely one of the standout aspects of the series, and music was an important part of the original Macross as well. She takes a very different approach to keeping music central to things, but I think it's highly effective. You get as with Cowboy Bebop and most of her other work, you get a really eclectic range of the main intro voices, which was dubbed into English for the English version, is probably one of the standouts. That again, it was one of the titles that was used in the ad that Teletoon cut. And it actually is based on an existing work, Sicilane, which is from, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of this. It was featured in Peleas e Melisande by Gabriel Fauré. Yoko Kanno adapts a lot of existing work in a lot of her music, which is, somewhat controversial at times. In this case, it's a public domain work, so I would give it a pass. And that's a big reason why a lot of her work is kind of eclectic as well. The central theme to the series is this idea of pioneering. And you see on-screen text referring to this all the time.
To all the pioneers, yeah.
Yeah, to all the pioneers. And, it has this idea of pioneering new technology, which is kind of what's going on at the surface. I was reading one interview with Shoji Kawamori, where he talks about one of the main things he wanted to explore in Macross Plus was new technology and how. I'll just read the segment right here. If a new form of media were to come out, I'd like to try that. I mean, it's been 100 years since movies were invented, right? It's an extreme sense. Everything fundamental to movies was done within the first 30 years. It's frustrating and disappointing. That's why I like to work on a new medium itself, something that's not moving pictures. You may be able to express different things on television, but it's still just an extension of movies. And I want to be part of those first 30 years. This time, it happened to be able to test the fusion of computers and animation. And of course, he's referring to Sharon Apple, who is the virtual idol who's featured in Macross Plus. But that's still just an application. I don't want that. I want to do the underlying development. It's frustrating, leaving aside whether it was good or bad. I was born in Japan. They were saying Hollywood was on its last legs, but they used computers to recover after all. So the OVA has these two kind of converging elements of testing competing military technology and the development of an AI idol. And I think he's very much trying to apply that same idea of pioneering to what at that time would have been seen as an unexplored concept. I doubt that Macross Plus was the first thing that explored the idea of an AI idol, but it was probably one of the most notable things up to that point. I don't think that William Gibson's Idaru had come out at that point. Shoji Kawamori and Shinichiro Watanabe are credited as co-directors, and while, Kawamori did the storyboards and he did a lot of the thematic conceptual work, I think when you watch Macross Plus, what you really see is a lot of Shinichiro Watanabe's flair for things like, multiculturalism and crowds, and just the movement of the characters. It's very distinct, and much like how Cowboy Bebop is the first anime for a lot of people, I think that Macross Plus carries a lot of those elements that will seem fresh and appealing to people who not only are not familiar with the original Macross, but aren't familiar with anime at all.
Absolutely. I was thinking about it after you said it, and like Cowboy Bebop is one of those animes that's very easy to have it resonate well with, like, let's go with non-otaku.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have lots of friends who like are not particularly into anime, but they love Cowboy Bebop. Some have it on Blu-ray and stuff. And in a lot of ways, Macross Plus is a lot like that. It's not bogged down by a lot of anime tropes, other than technically giant robots. But even then, they're like fighter jets. It's cool. And so it stands out. And like even aesthetically, the way the characters are drawn in some ways don't really look terribly anime, like in terms of the character design.
Kawamori was almost simultaneously producing Macross Plus and Macross 7, which was the TV series that came out right after.
I watched that a couple years ago, and it's interesting to see them try to advertise Macross Plus in Macross 7.
I haven't watched any of Macross 7, actually. I've seen very little of Macross. I've watched the first half of the original series as Robotech, which actually when it was airing on Space many years ago. For years I've been meaning to go back and watch the full original Macross, but I still just haven't gotten around to it. Even though, ironically, it's more accessible than ever, despite the fact that people keep accusing Harmony Gold of trying to hide it.
They're both on Amazon.
And Tubi. I think another streaming service as well.
You can get your pick. You can watch Macross or Robotech on Amazon.
Yeah, or the Robotech remastered version, which contains some restored footage. But I still haven't gotten to that. I have seen Do You Remember Love, which is fantastic, and Macross Plus. I haven't watched any of the stuff that comes out after. I've been meaning to give 7 a try. I have watched one episode of Macross Frontier, which was enough to know that I didn't want to watch more of it at that time.
Frontier is great.
Yeah, I
don't know what you're talking about.
You know what? Fair enough. I'm willing to give Frontier another go. I think maybe I just need to give it a fresh approach, a decade later or whatever. But yeah, Macross 7 has much more of what you call like a manga-based approach, whereas Macross Plus is much more influenced by Western cinema.
If someone asks me, is Macross 7 just like more Macross Plus? I'm like, no, it's very anime. Yeah. But there were cases of, like, the protagonist aircraft is a VF-19, it's the YF-19, the experimental version that Isamu is piloting in Macross Plus.
Yes.
And they even do some, like, Sharon Apple insert songs on the radio and stuff. I'm guessing it's like, well, we paid for these songs, we're gonna get them 2 shows.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Macross 7 was running on a TV budget, so anything they could, any conceptual or like music or anything like that they could reuse in Macross 7, I'm sure they did. But it also keeps, because the two projects were intertwined to a degree. Shoji Kawamori is credited as director on both, or co-director on both of them. But even despite the fact that they're very different, I think Kawamori's more of a just kind of sticking his fingers in things to make sure everything is going the way he wants, rather than real hands-on technical director kind of guy, because he's co-director on almost every Macross thing since 2, but they're all very different and distinct from each other, apart from just the central Macross ideas, like you have a love triangle, you have fighter jets, and you have some kind of idol, some kind of pop idol element to it. As long as it has those things, it's a Macross.
For me, it was my first exposure to the Macross world, and the way the show is presented, you don't even necessarily know there's more. Well, the OVA series itself makes some references to original Macross, like we're in the bar and they're singing and karaoke and it's My Boyfriend is a Pilot.
Yeah.
Things like that, but you can miss that and just think it's some song they wrote for it. So watching the show originally in around 2000, 2001 versus when I was actually watching it about a year ago with friends, I was able to pick up far more of the references going on in the show. And including the fact that the OVA makes no explanation of what a Zentradi is or micronization.
Yeah.
But I didn't ask too many questions when I watched that in 2000. I mean, the context makes more sense now, but it wasn't essential. So there is no, canonical baggage that's necessary to bring with you to enjoy this show at all.
The central focus on the series is the 30th anniversary of the peace treaty, that happens, I guess, not at the end of Macross, but a little before the ending, because it has that extended 2-year sequence at the end. But they don't really get into the details of it. The only stray element that doesn't get explained is the fact that Gold, who is one of the main characters, is half Zentradi and is green because of that. But it also raises the question of, like, why are there no other Zentradi? Because they're celebrating this 30-year peace treaty, and you only ever see humans around, which, if you're more familiar with the original, that actually might raise more questions, regarding that approach, which I thought was a little interesting. But also, again, I never finished the original Macross, so there might be elements that I'm.
But if you do look at Macross 7 or Macross Frontier, which came many years later, they do include the Zentradi significantly. Yeah, so you're right. It must have been a sort of creative omission chosen on purpose. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe they wanted the show to appeal, to be this kind of broad appeal, and it's not just a coincidence.
So there's one other director who was involved in some key scenes. It was Koji Morimoto, who was probably best known as the director of the Magnetic Rose sequence in Memories, which is usually associated with Satoshi Kon, since he wrote that one. But the director was Koji Morimoto. He directed all of the Sharon Apple concert sequences, and I guess also the scenes where the concerts bleed into AI takeover in the final episode. I think that's really notable because that is some of the most distinctive stuff that you'll find in this OVA. Just the way that those sequences take such a music video kind of approach, and very novel way of integrating CGI into this. In fact, I found the CGI integration to be, they were very selective about where they used it in Macross Plus, and I found it to be, you're seeing it used in the sort of ethereal Sharon Apple music concert sequences, things like the creation of logos and background advertisements, and the Macross Plus logo at the beginning itself, which is just the Sharon Apple logo. It's used very sparingly, and it creates the strongest impression during those Sharon Apple concert sequences. And I think that really goes a long way in just establishing the visual impact of Macross Plus as a whole. Just those sequences on their own. This would have been about the same time that Koji Morimoto would have been directing Magnetic Rose. You can kind of see that streak he was on at that time, and that plays a big role in what makes the idol aspect of Macross Plus distinct.
This show has a really good hook at the very beginning. Let's say it's late 90s, very early 2000 or so, and there's certain ideas of what kind of animation you've seen on TV before. And when this comes on, you get this somber opening with the cycle plane they're making. And then immediately after, it's like deep space. And it is this most amazing kinetic dogfighting sequence with detailed animation and fluidity of movement that is just about completely unprecedented to what most of us have seen at the time. And only after then do you really get to see that this is Macross, this is a whole thing, and it's going to be, 160 minutes, if I'm correct? Right. And that is such an amazing way and strong way to start this and really get someone hooked. Whoa, what is this? I want to see more of this. And the voice acting is really good. And like I said, you have no canonical baggage in order to keep into it. You're not just watching because it's cool. The story is engaging and keeping you pulled in.
And maybe we should touch on the English dub as well.
Bryan Cranston or Solid Snake.
Lee Stone, as he is credited in the actual release, but it is Bryan Cranston of Breaking Bad fame who plays the main character Isamu.
Is it sad that I'm old enough to see him more as Hal from Malcolm in the Middle?
Oh yeah, and Hal from Malcolm in the Middle. I'm assuming people know that connection. And at the time that he was recording this, he did multiple Power Rangers monster voices. He was in a whole bunch of ads. He was doing all this small work early in his career, and it's pretty rare that someone who gets their start doing that many very visible kind of small projects would make the jump to do something as big as he did in the end. A lot of people make fun of that, but it's pretty impressive. So he plays the main character, Richard Epcar, who we know as Bato from Ghost in the Shell, multiple voices in Lupin the Third. He's the second character. He's the secondary protagonist, the secondary character,
part-time antagonist,
Gold-Goa Bowman, who is the half Zentradi. Basically the idea is that Osamu and Gold are each testing different test fighter pilots, the YF-19 and the YF-21. I guess Isamu's is more of a manual controlled kind of device, whereas Gold's has a telepathic. Yeah.
I don't know if telepathic link. It's a mental link. The plane is like part of him. when they show that sequence, he's like thinking of stretching his fingers and such, and that's when the wings change shape.
Yeah.
Like, it's like he is the plane. It's a very interesting way. They showed it very well.
Yeah, I think the movie emphasizes it a little more, especially in the final sequence. Again, I should have watched it in advance and I didn't. Central to the series is that kind of new rivalry between those two characters. And then we have, the female lead, Myung Fang Lone, who is played by, she's credited as Anne Sherman. It's Reva Spear. She hasn't been in that many anime titles over the years. The dub overall is a bit of a mixed bag. I think that the more recognizable actors do a good job. The others not so much. She gives a bit of a mixed performance, I find. But central to this story is, there used to be a love triangle between these three characters, and that's kind of lurking under the surface of everything that's going on. But these three characters used to be friends in high school, but Myung is now producer for Sharon Apple, who is the supposedly AI or partially AI idol. The dub was directed by Quint Lancaster, who was actually Kevin Seymour, who sadly died a few years ago. He's been in charge of some of the most notable English dubs, mostly LA-based ones that we've seen from the late 90s and early 2000s. He did the second Akira dub, he did Cowboy Bebop, he did Ghost in the Shell, more than I can name. If there was an LA-based dub that had a big impact, chances are he was behind it. And I don't think this was his first one, but it was definitely one of the first dubs that he produced. And he definitely had a touch for an approach to voice acting that, like I said, it was a bit of a mixed bag in this particular case, but I think he knew how to produce something that would appeal to more general audiences and kind of maintain more of a cinematic flavor than a typical cartoon dub.
Absolutely.
A lot of the time, yeah. Now we were talking earlier about how episode 4 was redubbed at a certain point for the Blu-ray release in Japan. So what happened was, when part 4 was originally dubbed by Manga Entertainment, they actually had to delay the episode, or releasing the episode, because they weren't provided with a separated audio, or separated dialogue and music track. So they had to recreate everything from scratch, which created some major audio issues. I don't know whether those audio issues resulted in the delay of part 4 airing on Teletoon, or if it created some kind of technical problem with airing them on television. It's hard to say. But for some reason, the quality of the audio in this episode was not seen as adequate for the Japanese release. So you have this weird situation where it's one of the few Blu-ray titles that you could almost justify importing from Japan, because it has, the original dub, but it only has the original dub for the first 3 episodes. Mm-hmm. For episode 4, they actually, through Bandai Visual, went back and redubbed the entire episode a decade later. And unfortunately, they could not get many members of the cast back. Bryan Cranston, obviously at that point, was not available to reprise
at least not at a price they could afford.
Yeah. More interestingly, Richard Epcar, they didn't even get him back to play Gold. They wound up getting Michael Gregory to do him in the in that, which is in the redub, which is unfortunate because I guess there was he just wasn't available at the time, because Richard Epcar was quite active at that time. It seems like they should have been able to get him for this project, which makes me question what their priority was in actually redubbing this when they couldn't get the primary actor,
especially
the primary
since
actor back.
It's a Japanese release, so why are they even terribly concerned with the dub? I'm assuming though it's primarily related to music rights. Like, music is such a big deal in terms of licensing and everything else for an anime.
So if I recall correctly, I think the reason that they gave for including the dub was to create to a Japanese audience the cinematic experience of watching a Hollywood movie in English with Japanese subtitles.
What a fascinating approach.
Yeah, which for something like Macross Plus, it makes perfect sense, because that's what Macross Plus is emulating to begin with. Why they chose to redub episode 4 rather than just creating an entire fresh dub for the movie version, which has never been dubbed, and giving the option to watch that with Japanese subtitles. That seems like it would have made more sense, and it would have been a more comprehensive experience. But there you go. That's what we got in the end. I will admit I have Blu-ray rips for all the original episodes, and I just took that original dub from the 4th episode of my own DVDs and muxed it in on the Blu-ray. So I have my own little perfected version, even
which you can choose which audio track you want now.
Yeah, I don't know why I went through the effort of doing that when I'm kind of lukewarm on this dub anyway, but
it's consistent. Not to mention, it is the dub you listened to many years ago. It's the dub you always listened to on the DVD if you watched it.
Exactly.
Like when we showed it with friends, we put it to a vote when episode 4 came up. It's like, all right, guys, Solid Snake or Hal from Malcolm in the Middle? Who do we want for the final episode?
Yeah.
We did wind up going with the original dub.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, we brushed over that. David Hayter played Isamu in the redub, which also a strange choice because he wasn't really that active in anime dubbing at that time. But
no,
yeah, many strange quirks in that redub. They were able to get like mostly the actors who hadn't done anime in years, and I think Steve Bloom they got back as the primary antagonist, Marge Guelda. But so we have that weird situation, and I should probably talk a little about the legal situation with Macross as well, because Macross Plus was actually available still. You could buy the DVDs, you could watch it streaming on Tubi until earlier this year. And
there were DVDs in print?
Yeah,
in the West?
Well, so I think Manga Entertainment printed like a
I see, old stock.
And but you could still buy new ones until a couple of years ago. But it was, more importantly, Macross Plus was streaming on Tubi TV until early this year. Macross Plus has always been interesting because it has been a major exception to the legal battle that has been going on between the U.S. licensor of the original Macross, Harmony Gold, and the rights holders in Japan, Tatsunoko and Big West. And there's been a decades-long legal battle going on because Tatsunoko sold the rights to Harmony Gold, who are very aggressive in protecting that license in North America to the point where it has prevented other Macross titles apart from the original Macross from being released here. The only exceptions were Macross 2, which is the previous OVA that is largely considered to be discontinuity, and Macross Plus. So it's kind of unclear why that is. I've heard some accounts saying it's just because Harmony Gold wanted to show that they weren't being merciless in their protection of the Macross franchise, and they let Manga Entertainment get their hands on those two. But I also know that Manga Entertainment put some money into Macross Plus because you actually see them in the Japanese credits. So it was probably a combination of those two things of why they were able to hold on to the rights for so long. But that lasted until earlier this year when Harmony Gold's licensing of the original Macross was supposed to, it did expire in early May of 2020. But last year they did announce that they were able to relicense it from the rights holders. I
cannot believe that happened.
And they let them have it, and this time there is no legal ambiguity whatsoever into Harmony Gold's rights to the Macross franchise in North America. And in fact, the situation might be worse now because Macross Plus being removed from Tubi TV seemed to coincide with the license renewal. So I think that they now have control of this and are able to suppress it the way they've been suppressing Macross Frontier and Macross 7 and Macross Delta and everything else, and Do You Remember Love?
But now you can watch Shadow Chronicles.
Yeah, you can watch Shadow Chronicles on Funimation now. Actually, Funimation actually controls they're actually handling the actual home video rights to Macross. In fact, I think they're managing most of the Robotech license on behalf of Harmony Gold now. So right now, if there's any hope of getting those later Macross titles out it would be with Funimation, and unfortunately Funimation is
would love to
not
see
as reliable as they used to be.
We actually had the Harmony Gold people at our convention in the mid-2000s because they were doing that whole Robotech Shadow Chronicles tour.
Yeah,
and they were the guests at our convention, and, you know, they showed some previews and stuff, and at the time it seemed like anything related to Robotech was a win. Even if, you know, it was kind of what people would sometimes consider a bastardized version of it. We weren't so picky back then.
Yeah, here in Vancouver, Anime Evolution for years had difficulty getting industry to come, except Harmony Gold. I imagine that Harmony Gold was willing to pay the price. Who was the rep they usually sent out? He's still working with them.
I remember they sent a couple of guys up to our convention in Ottawa. It's funny though, because Robotech, Shadow Chronicles and that stuff connects so poorly unless you watch specifically Robotech, which I don't think the fandom was really that centered on around then.
Yeah.
Macross Plus, at least until Macross Frontier came out, probably had the strongest impact on the anime fandom.
Yeah. So sorry, as I was saying, Anime Evolution had no problem getting Harmony Gold, and the rep, I can't remember his name, but I asked him if he knew that Robotech had not aired nationally in Canada, and he was very displeased that I brought that up, because he was well aware of the fact that it had. This was before it was airing on Space. But it started airing on Space a little later, and that's actually where I saw most of Macross. And I was going to mention how it was kind of weird that Teletoon didn't try to play up the Robotech connection with Macross Plus, but in the end it may have been better that they didn't. Because, well, first of all, they didn't understand the context of any of this stuff, so they probably wouldn't have known that connection to begin with. But also, I don't think a lot of people in Canada had seen Robotech, because it had only, if you saw it, it's because you lived in one of these specific markets where you could get a border station from the United States was running it.
There was one kid at my school who'd, actually seen episodes. Around that time, you could start downloading episodes and stuff, but no, that's a different kind of exposure in that era. That was who had good access versus, what was on TV. Yeah,
if you got, and I asked Cameron Archer about this, if you got WUHF from Rochester, I don't know I think some areas in Ontario get that border station.
That's a Fox station, right?
It's Fox, yeah.
I got that station. It was on our cable, too.
Yeah. And if you got KVOS here in Vancouver out of Bellingham, I think those may have actually been the only two stations running Robotech back in the 1980s. Back then, chances are you weren't getting it on cable either. You had to get it through an antenna. So if you were able to pick those stations up on your antenna, you could have watched Robotech if you were in one of those two cities. So, again, not very well exposed in Canada. So this Macross Plus probably was the first exposure many people just watching TV had to just Macross at all.
And in some ways, for a lot of people, it would be their last.
It would be their last as well, yes. I don't know how popular Robotech was when it ran on Space, but that's a bit of a different era. We're jumping.
I didn't even realize it aired on Space. That was later in the 2000s?
It was about 2006, yeah.
Oh, I probably wasn't watching Space then. I'm guessing they used the new ADV dub for that?
No, it was Robotech. It was the remastered Robotech. The one that had where they restored as much footage as they could with the parts that were dubbed so basically any footage that was cut from the original Macross that didn't have characters talking, they restored it, which included some fan service too, which was it was great. 5:30 p.m. on Space. But yeah, that was really that was the Robotech experience for most of Canada for the most part, unless you were getting tapes from someone from the States or again downloading it as soon as internet became an option for getting that kind of stuff. So yeah, I guess maybe we'll just finish off by just talking a little more about the story of Macross Plus itself. So as we mentioned before, it was originally supposed to be a movie, but it was instead modified into 4 OVAs. We should have watched the movie, then we can compare the two. But watching it again, it really struck me just how much of a prototype it was for Cowboy Bebop's storyline overall. Because central to Macross Plus, and as it's mostly exposed in the final episode, is that the focus on these 3 characters who are trying to move away from this traumatic event that happened back when they were in high school. you never really get a full picture of what actually happened there. Very similar to Cowboy Bebop, where they never fully explain what the background between Spike and Vicious and Julia was. You never get the full picture of what was really going on in this love triangle between Isamu and Gold and Myung. And you just get a few flashbacks with very little context. It seems that Gold may have been dating Myung, but then Gold caught her with Isamu, and then some violence and possibly assault happened. Again, it's really not clear. The characters, however, just kind of bury that, and they hide it with petty things like high school rivalry. And that's the way that Cowboy Bebop's a little better, because I think a lot of people seem to get hung up on the high school rivalry aspect in Macross Plus, when it's actually just supposed to be a facade.
Yeah, you get that one scene with Mayun's face, and she's all horrified during the flashback, and it's like, oh, this was actually pretty bad.
It really stands out to me that it's, again, what's not said has so much importance. But again, it's a lot easier to miss. It's a little sloppier compared to some of the things Keiko Nobumoto did later. But you can really tell this is the kind of story that she wants to tell and what she excels at. I also read one interesting thing about how there was a Macross Plus novelization that she wrote in 1996. There was a character in the novel named Glenn who became a woman due to a mysterious disease that happened. And it seems that character's story is what evolved into Jupiter Jazz in Cowboy Bebop as well. So there's a lot that bridges Macross Plus and Cowboy Bebop together creatively. And again, Cowboy Bebop, widely considered one of the best introductions to anime a person can have.
Oh, absolutely. 20 years later, sounds like, what's a good anime to start on? Yeah. Bebop.
But you see those elements in Macross Plus too, as well. And unfortunately, nothing else has really captured that since, even from the same creative staff. Actually, have you watched Carol and Tuesday?
Yeah, I just finished that a little while ago, like about a month or two. It was before lockdown began, but I think it was this year in 2020. I didn't see it and watch the fan sub only from Japanese Netflix.
I enjoyed Carol and Tuesday a lot, but one thing that let me down was the way it handled AI. I thought it was going to be more of an expansion of some of the ideas in Macross Plus.
It felt like they were building to something there, and then they just kind of abandoned that thread.
And I was especially disappointed with the one character who was designing all the AI. It seems that he was really underutilized, which was disappointing. Whereas the AI just kind of became just a minor illustration of Angela's characterization rather than something that
despite
factored into something greater.
3/4 of the show trying to build up to something with that whole thread.
Yeah, exactly. So that I found that to be a little bit of a letdown after what we see play out with Sharon Apple in Macross Plus. But again, Carol and Tuesday is a very different kind of show, and it's something you have to approach from a different mindset as well. So, yeah, it's kind of understandable, but it still shows that there's a lot of that. A lot of the creative energy from Macross Plus is still running into other things today too from that same staff.
I wonder how well that show is going to age with Instagram references and South by Southwest and everything.
Well, it's already aged badly with the South by Southwest stuff because
that's a 1-year postponement.
Well, Shinichiro Watanabe was supposed to appear at South by Southwest along with the musical voices of Carol and Tuesday, and it was supposed to be this big tie into reality.
Well, maybe this is why South by Southwest is on Mars now.
Yeah,
they had to abandon Earth after the pandemic.
It'll be interesting. I think Carol and Tuesday is something we can appreciate for the time it was created
for sure.
In the future. But yeah, I think I would agree. I would say Macross Plus, obviously despite being very obviously from the 90s, has probably aged a little better. Here's how I think of it. If you were to pick two anime that or two specific shows that fully embody anime from the 90s, I think, well, one would obviously be Saber Marionette.
I've not actually seen that show.
I haven't really seen much of it, but its aesthetic embodies a lot of the things that people think about when they think of anime from the 90s. So you'd put that on one pedestal. But on the other pedestal, I think you'd put Macross Plus. It is 90s as hell, but in all of the absolute best ways.
Yeah, it's weird and experimental, but it's like really impressive, and it embodies the idea of like, this is something you've never seen before, at least as a Western viewer in that era.
So Macross Plus, a true classic from the 90s, a important part of Teletoon's history that I don't think we should forget, because that was a very interesting time in the history of media here in this country for sure.
Canadian fans, it was very good as a very introductory anime to get you into this fandom much deeper after that.
Very much so. And unfortunately, not accessible today, at least not legally. Hopefully one day this Harmony Gold nonsense can be worked out, and people can watch Macross Plus in all of its HD glory, even if it doesn't have Bryan Cranston for the whole thing.
Could you imagine Funimation doing that? They dub Macross, they do a new dub of Macross Plus and everything else, and for like 2 or 3 years it's just nonstop, like Macross as if it was new.
See, I would have...
That's the dream.
I can more easily imagine Netflix doing that. I was kind of hoping that Netflix would swoop in and outbid Harmony Gold on all the Macross stuff.
They did it with Evangelion.
Yeah, exactly. They would have pulled an Evangelion, and you know, completely redubbing everything from scratch is kind of what they do, and it could very well be what Macross needs, even if we kiss the Kevin Seymour dub for Macross Plus goodbye forever. But yeah.
Well, that's what certain media preservationists trying to make versions with every dub possible. I definitely have copies of Evangelion with both English dubs plus Japanese.
It's important work. But yeah, I think that just about wraps us up. So Ashley, can you just let people know where they can find you on social media and online?
I really only maintain a Twitter account. The current name on Twitter is called Bliss Wallpaper. It's pretty just a throwaway Twitter name. And yeah, that's about it, really.
And thanks for tuning in to Zon in Canada. You can reach me on Twitter at jbetteridge or email zonincanada@gmail.com. The theme song is by Ultra Kleistron and can be found on his album Packet Flood. And you can find that at ultrakleistron.com. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever you use for your podcasts. And hey, just so you know, I recently started a coffee account, and since cafes and coffee shops seem to be opening again, I wouldn't mind a little extra money to spend on that. So if you like what I do here on the show, you can support me if you head down to coffee.com/ZonNCanada. That's ko-fi.com/ZonNCanada. You can give me a tip, and I'd appreciate that a lot. That's all for this episode. See you again.